Welcome everyone. My name is Jane and on behalf of British Council of Scotland, I'm delighted to welcome you to our Wearable Languages Take Me webinar for secondary pupils as part of Languages Week Scotland. Next slide, please, Lorna. Thank you. The theme of Languages Week Scotland this year is Our Multilingual Futures. So it's very fitting that we're here together today and learning about all the opportunities that are available when we learn languages. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank our fantastic cultural institutes here in Scotland, the Institut Français d'Écosse, Goethe Institute and the Spanish Embassy Education Office for supporting us in this event. It's great to see you all on the call today as well. We have some fantastic speakers lined up to share their language learning journeys, the languages that they've learned, where they've travelled to, and the different ways that they use languages in their lives and work. Next slide, please, Lorna. So as you can see here, we'll leave some time at the end for a Q&A. So if you've downloaded the pupil workbook, you can look through some of the question prompts there as we go through the discussion. If not, that's no problem, but please do make a note of any questions that you might have along the way. So we will leave time after each speaker for you to write down some of your burning questions, put them in the chat, and then we'll come to those at the end. We're really pleased to have about 60 schools signed up to join the session today. So you may all be at very different stages in your language learning journey, but we hope that the session will inspire you to learn more about the fantastic opportunities and doors that can open up to you when you study languages. As a linguist and languages graduate, former language assistant myself, I love languages. I've seen firsthand how languages can help us build personal connections, open the door to amazing career opportunities, and broaden our understanding of the world. For me, none of this would have been possible without my fantastic language teachers at school. So shout out Mr. Fraser and Miss Sturgeon, who introduced me to a world of curiosity about language learning and cultural understanding. I'll always be grateful for that. So a big shout out to all of your teachers here today as well. You do a brilliant job. Before we introduce our speakers, just want to share a short housekeeping notice. Please put any questions that you have in the chat. If you see a question that you would like to hear our speakers answer, if you react to that as well, that can help us to prioritise it when we come to the Q&A at the end. Remember not to put any personal details in the chat, like your email address or phone number. And my details are on this slide as well, if any of your teachers would like to get in touch after the session. We've got some brilliant linguists and speakers lined up to speak to us today. First, we will hear from Angela, CEO and co-founder of Think Tank Maths, a company creating mathematical frameworks to assure safety, security and sustainability in near-orbital space and to enable the energy transition. Angela is also Vice President of the Scottish Energy Forum. We'll then hear from Alistair, a film and theatre maker based on the Isle of Mull off the west coast of Scotland. He makes a podcast called What We Do in the Winter about the lives of people on the islands around Mull and Iona. His films explore the nature of how communities express themselves, and he works in English, French and Gaelic. Alistair is also a founding member of Screen Argyll, which exhibits films and delivers film education all over Scotland. Harriet is a former student of French and Spanish at the University of Edinburgh, and since finishing her studies, she's worked as a freelancer with a variety of institutions, including the Consulate General of Spain in Edinburgh, and Edinburgh Spanish Film Festival, the French Film Festival UK, and Edinburgh International Festival. And Ailey is a former British Council language assistant who's lived and worked in Quebec and the south of France. She's currently studying for her master's degree in Paris and has gained valuable skills and experiences from her language learning along the way. So without further ado, let's hear from our speakers. We'll stop sharing the screen now and welcome our first speaker, Angela, to share her presentation and German language experiences. Guten Tag, Angela.
Ja, guten Tag. Aber ich habe auch Französisch gelernt. So I speak, hi, I'm Angela Matisse. In fact, my husband's French, and so the name is French too. I don't have a presentation, guys, because I think, as you heard, you know, I run a maths company, a company that's doing things to keep our satellites safe so that we can actually have this call. So that our mobile phones stay alive, because we're putting more and more stuff up there, and there's lots of debris now gathering. I think you've probably heard that, and if you haven't, look it up and inform yourself. And so our team works on the very clever algorithms and things that are needed by satellite people and anybody who wants to put something up in lower Earth orbit. We're also, as Jane said, we're looking at, we're working with partners on how do you take wind energy and solar energy and convert it into new fuels that aren't impacting the earth or, are impacting our environment. So that's great. So that's, how did a French and German language and literature graduate from Glasgow University end up there? And I suppose that's the big question. But I think the key is in what languages went to me. And I don't do slides when I talk to clients as well. And I talk to people. I want to talk to you. It's bad enough not being able to see your faces. And everybody else got fantastic slides. And the other thing is, I'm kind of from an earlier generation. I graduated in 1984, and we didn't have mobile phones, so we didn't take lots of photographs at that time. And so it's a very different world. So all of the stories I'm telling, you have to imagine it without any internet, and you have to imagine it without any mobile phones to help. So that's what I do. How did I learn languages? Well, look, I suppose I was fortunate. My mother's family were Italian. They are Italian. Unfortunately, most of them are now gone. But so I grew up in a Scottish Italian environment, and I always use Christmas Day as an example. We go to nonno and nonna's for a typical raucous Italian Christmas thing in the morning, and about 4 o'clock, all of the families would head off to their partner's place, and we'd go to Granny and Grandad Elliott's, where it was a very sort of turkey and Scotch broth, which I loved. But Christmas Day was always a duolingual sort of experience. But my grandparents spoke Italian to each other, and my bisnonna didn't speak any English at all. So that was my first exposure to different culture and language. I suppose I grew up as this very bicultural sort of person. But I very, very, very quickly, I think also you've got to think 1965, how many people jumped on a plane and went anywhere then? You've got to think back then, it wasn't. My parents, my dad won a prize at his work, and we went to Barcelona. Now that sounds like, oh, so what? But back then, that was one of the first aircraft flights anybody ever did. And I suppose that also taught me Spanish, and I heard people speaking Spanish. Now, I grew up in Partick in Glasgow. Some of you might know it. These are interesting experiences that I think obviously inspire you to think about life and what you want to do. So all through my schooling, and then the other thing, at the age of 7, we had French classes. They used to roll in a television, I remember, on a stand, and it was on wheels. And there was a Madame Slack, and you had these puppets that would sing called Clicquot and Padapouf. And they would sing songs to us, and we would sing, like I won't do it for you, but sort of. Oh, I will. Ainsi font les petites marionnettes. And, so we got this exposure to French at a very early age, and at the age of 7. And I just always wanted, I sort of thought languages, gee, that will, if I speak languages, the other thing, it will open up my horizons and it will help me, the world is bigger than Glasgow. The world is bigger than Scotland. The world is bigger than Great Britain. And that was really, I just thought it would enhance who I was and the opportunities. I think it was more about who I was. I wanted to meet, and I enjoyed meeting people from other cultures. And I spread that beyond Europe now, because I think it's very, very important in our current times that we know these other, we know that there are other cultures, and people have a different soul. They have a different persona, and they have a different attitude to life, and it's brilliant. So the other thing, which probably helped quite a lot, was I actually went, because of my Italian heritage. There was something like the Alliance Française and the Goethe Institute, but there was the Casa d'Italia. And from the age of 8 to 12, every Saturday morning, I went to Italian classes. When my mates were going to the cinema or going ice skating, that's what I did. So I probably had, it's only when you do something like this conversation, you see you have a lot of insight. So at the age of 12, Britain had kind of joined the EU. And a friend, a neighbor said to me many years on that when he asked me what I wanted to be, and his daughter was my best friend, she wanted to be a nurse, and she was a brilliant nurse. And I had said, and I don't remember saying this, I want to go to Europe, become an international lawyer, go to Europe and help unify Europe and make it, make Britain part of Europe. I don't know what a 12-year-old, and I don't remember my head saying that, but that's obviously what my heart was saying. And I did live in Brussels. I lived in Brussels. In fact, I lived on the continent. I lived between Brussels and Paris, and our home was Paris for 22 years. I lived in Belgium. We had, I was seconded to Belgium. So, but we always had our home. So we didn't have a home here in Scotland. And I say we because when I did my studies, I had to do a year abroad. Had to. It was brilliant to do that year abroad, and I chose France. And then, so I decided very, very early on that I needed to get as much exposure to Germany so that my German would be just as good, because I was going to do hires and I wanted to go to uni and I wanted to study French and German. This was my campaign, if you like. Just like people want to be astronauts. I wanted to be, I wanted languages and I wanted to be that multicultural. I wanted to be European. And that's not deliberate. I just drink out of this every day. And I really bemoan, and I really, really hope that we do something so that our young people can do the same thing. So that's what really inspired me, was that whole journey. But when I was in France, a year abroad, I was 19 and I met my now husband. So 40 odd years later, we're still together. In fact, we run the company together. And so, multiculturalism again. We, all of his family in France. We have friends in France. We have friends in Germany. We have friends in the Netherlands. And our business today is because of that. Because even the jobs I got, for example, the jobs that I got was because big British companies that have said, we need people, we need language students, because we need to create that link with European companies. We need partnerships. And so people who were learning languages became a huge asset. And so I joined one of Britain's big international companies. It was called Imperial Chemical Industries, called ICI. It doesn't exist anymore. But if you remember Dulux paint, that's they made Dulux paint. And I was seconded to Belgium, first of all, in the late 1980s. So and then I moved to Switzerland, and then I lived in Germany, in Freiburg, in Breisgau. Making friends and making contacts all the way who are still there and are still part of what I would say, the fabric of my life now. And so, I think as I said before, how does it facilitate? I think you can go to meetings that, you can go to meetings and you can meet with people in business, and they all will speak very good English. But if you open up and you start speaking in their language, and not only that, you have a cultural knowledge. My line in German is always, I did Mittelhochdeutsch, which is like doing Beowulf, the equivalent of Old English. And I can quote very, very badly, but pieces from 12th century sort of medieval German, and most Germans will say, God, I can't even do that. And so immediately there's a barrier comes down and you get a better contact. And so then you build trust. And if you build trust, then, all sorts of beautiful things happen, both for you and for the opportunity you're discussing. So that's kind of, my journey. I've been, with my job, I traveled in 37 countries. Most of them were continental Europe. Yes, I've been to the USA. Yes, I've been to Australia. But most of my life was France, Germany, Spain, Italy. I still speak Italian. And we have a subsidiary company in Norway as well. So what did languages do? Languages gave me, I think Charlemagne said, when you speak another language, you gain another soul. I actually think what it did was it expanded my soul, and I mean that hugely. And forever, I will be in. And I really, really hope that we do something so that, the people that are watching this too can have that opportunity to go out and make those contacts across the world, but particularly, I think, with our nearest partners in Europe. Thank you. I think that's my time up.
Thank you so much, Angela. That was absolutely brilliant to hear about your experiences. And I think that sort of that 12-year-old Angela thinking about I want to go to Europe and being able to kind of say now how you've lived in Germany, France, Italy, Switzerland, Spain, and have had all these amazing experiences in your personal and professional life. I think, yeah, absolutely fascinating to hear about. So thank you so much for sharing. I know that people watching will have lots of questions. So what I'll maybe encourage you to do is for a few seconds, just think about those questions, maybe pop those in the chat for the end. And in the meantime, we can set Alistair up for the next speaker slot. So think of those questions, pop them in the chat, and we will start the next presentation very shortly.
Okay, so if I can have the first slide, if that's all right, please. Thank you. So I'm Alistair Satchell. I'm a film and theatre maker. I'm based in Isle of Mull, although I am currently in Dunoon today. And next one, please, if that's okay. And you can ask for one, the next one after that as well. Thank you. I was first kind of encounter I had with French culture was the because I'm particularly interested in French languages and culture, having lived and studied in France and then worked with French. First encounter with French culture I had was through the work of Hergé, Georges Remy, who did Tintin, and I was really fascinated by this. Tintin, of course, is Belgian rather than French, and I used to spend hours as a wee man in the library reading Tintin and renting the Tintin books and getting them out, and yeah, just it was a different world. It was another world that seemed really fun and exciting. And there was another graphic novel series that really spoke to me as well, which is the next slide, if that's okay. And that was Asterix. Now, Asterix is French and very, very French as well, and not just French, actually quite Celtic. It's about the Romans fighting trying to take over France, and there's one little bit of France goes no, and it's brilliant. If you can go to the next slide, if that's okay. And these Celts were actually these French were actually Celtic people. Now, I was conscious as a wee boy growing up in Dunoon, growing up with a family that had Gaelic in the generation before, and my grand's generation, that we were Celts as well. So I was always interested in this line between France and Scotland is this kind of Celtic connection. And I was very lucky to explore that with a school later on when I was older. So French culture remained sort of at a distance from me for quite a while. I wasn't entirely sure about it because there's something that was just in Dunoon. We had Americans here with the naval base, which was really exciting. There was a sort of a naval base that had nuclear weapons, and it was quite a daunting thing to know that that was here. And so we had lots of cultural encounters with American folk who were really lovely to meet. But French stuff remained slightly at a distance until I got to secondary school, if that's okay to go for the next slide. Thank you. I was very lucky when I was growing up. My dad was in the Merchant Navy, and I got to travel with my dad on big tankers and go across the Atlantic and go to different places. I went to Algeria as well when I was a small boy, and it was really brilliant to encounter foreign cultures and just have that desire to kind of go, I want to know more about this. So at school, I chose to study French. And in third year, we got Bibliobus. I don't know if anyone else an age to remember Bibliobus at all. And this was our kind of way into the French language. It was audio and reading, and it was great fun. It was really it was a nice thing. So I was always taken with the French class at school. We had a lovely, lovely teacher, Mrs. Chambers, who's no longer with us, who I think was just superb. And at third year, I studied French, first, second year, and third year did standard grades in it. And then when it came to hires, I didn't choose to go for it straight away. I thought I'd maybe just see what else I could find. And I give the next slide, thank you. And that took me to thinking about the French exchange, which was going to happen in my last year, just after I left school. So I would get in sixth year, I'd get to go to France, to Brittany, as part of that. And I thought, actually, I should take higher French, and so I did. I studied it, and it was great. It was really, really good. You could actually feel yourself making progress with this foreign culture, this foreign language, after studying all these abstract things like nouns and verbs and like, what are they doing? Why do they do that? To actually be given, particularly at the higher level, I guess Nat 5 more, that side of things now, texts that were in French that were real people had written for a reason and were passionate about. It was brilliant. It was like, oh man. So to get a chance to go to France and study, to experience French life with a French partner, and it was absolutely magical. We went to Loudiac in Brittany, which of course is a Celtic part of the world, so it was that Celtic connection straight away there. If it's okay to go on to the next slide. My friend Gilda, who was my partner for it, was fantastic. He was a great person. His mum and dad ran a bike shop in the village of Ludiag, which was just so lovely to experience French culture and like little radishes with butter on them, and oh, lovely. Anyway, yeah, oh gosh, yeah, radish and butter, that's the way to do it. But as part of this, I got a chance to go and see a French film. Now, I've always been interested in filmmaking and have made films since I was about 16 or 17. And we went to see a film called Le Huitième Jour. And this film, I would say, probably changed my life. If you've not seen it, I recommend it very strongly. It's Daniel Auteuil, a classic French actor who started off in very silly, rude French films that then went into more serious French films and then went into these wonderful art house French films. And Le Huitième Jour is about a guy with Down syndrome and Daniel Auteuil, who is a businessman who is having trouble in his life, and their paths meet, and there's just a most magical encounter. Anyway, I was watching this film, and I discovered that I could pretty much understand most of it. I was like, oh my goodness, here I am in France, but as a teenager, 16, 17, with other French folk and English speaking language folk around me. It was like, oh my goodness. So the world just went bah for me, and it remains to this day one of my absolute favourite films. If it's okay to go to the next one. Thank you. I went on to study theatre and playwriting at Queen Margaret in Edinburgh when I was 18, and I was there for 4 years. And at that point, British theatre was very much text-based and people standing around, not moving very much, and being very, very boring. And I was like, oh no, this isn't what I want from theatre. And all the stuff that I found interesting and exciting from theatre came from one source. And this was a place in France called École Jacques Lecoq, and this is a school of movement. If that's okay to go to the next slide. So after finishing studying at the college in Edinburgh, I moved over to Paris and studied mime and clowning for 2 years. We did cabaret and we did all sorts of wonderful things. One of my favourite things is called tréteau. A tréteau is a little small stage. It's 2 meters by 1 meter. You put 7 people on it and you tell the biggest story you possibly can without anyone being allowed to leave. It's amazing. The total opposite of the British theatre I was experiencing. So I had a most wonderful time doing that. It was an international school as well. If it's okay to go to the next slide. And French was our common language. We all taught French. It was all taught in French. There were quite a few Brits there as well, and we were quite aware of the pompous nature of the British cultural enterprise. And so we could have, we all, that was a sketch we did about Maggie Thatcher, which was quite amusing. So we made these connections with folk across the world through French language there. So there's German people, Spanish people, Italian people, Korean people. Oh, it was like this melting pot of languages. It was the most wonderful thing to experience these connections. As you know, as you're saying before, friendship. Friendship is all what it was about, was making these connections and understanding other people to inform your life. Thank you. Can I have the next slide as well? After training, my friends and I had a company together. So there was a Frenchman, it's not a joke, this, a Frenchman, an Argentinian, a German, and a Scotsman. And we toured a play around the world together in French, which was a children's horror play. And it was great fun. So years of making connections, again, through French. It was just really absolutely brilliant to kind of experience that. We took it to America, and playing French theatre in America was a very interesting experience indeed. Okay, so okay to go on to the next one. Thank you. When I came back to the UK, I worked more in theatre directing, and the French language connections kind of slipped away. And this addresses the question of fluency, which I'll come back to just at the end, if that's all right. And so I saw a job come up when my son was born in 2010. It was about a year and a half afterwards. The cinema in Edinburgh, the film house as it was, it's coming back soon, we're looking for someone to work with them with the Cinémathèque Française to deliver a project about cinema and France, and a way to learn cinema for a year from this French source. And so the project was called Cinéma 100 ans de jeunesse, the cinema, 100 years of youth, and it's to mark the centenary of cinema. And it was great. So I've been working with that ever since, exploring how do you take one particular aspect of cinema and explore it over the course of a year with a school group to then kind of talk about how to make films. Really, really extraordinary project, and all taught in French in France, and then I bring it back from France, interpret it into English, and deliver it back here in the UK. It was okay to go on to the next one. Thank you. Question of fluency is a really, really big thing that you wanted us to address, Jane, and that is fluency comes and goes at certain times. You have to keep your hand in. And the thing that I find most interesting is the cultural exports from somewhere else. So if it's okay, the next slide. There's a guy who I love, French music, I love, absolutely, so much in there. This is Georges Brassens. Georges Brassens is the most incredible songwriter and makes songs that tell, like, there's so few people that are as skilled as him in English. Like, he tells stories from his life, from the resistance to the French movements. Oh, it's just amazing. You know, he was alive during the Second World War and head out and stuff. And oh, it's really extraordinary. And if it's okay to go into the next one, I'm conscious my time is just coming up as well. So there's a French radio station called FIP, F-I-P. If you get a chance to tune in or use any iPad or iPhone or Android phone or whatever, find FIP, tune in. It plays music from North Africa, from the south coast of England, from Iceland, and it's just the most broad sense of music you can get across ever. But it's also it's spoken entirely in French, the bits in between, and it just allows you to keep in contact with the world of la francophonie. If it's okay to go on to the next one as well. Let's not forget our own languages here in Scotland as well. I'm a Scots speaker, I feel very strongly about that, but I speak Gaelic, so I also have Gaelic, and I think it's really important to work with Gaelic and find more about our culture, because that's the thing about languages. They inform you on your own culture and the culture of others, and kind of nourish everything. And the fundamental thing it allows, if it's okay to have the next slide, is connection. It's all about connection, making friends, learning more about the world around you so you can inform your own world, and also just make other people's lives better, and just have pals and travel and have fun. And just language just allows you to meet other people who are like you and people who are not like you and inform your world. And it's just the best. Learn as many languages as you can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alistair. So interesting to hear. And I think all those cultural moments that you've had, I think will really speak to all of us who have learnt languages. I think seeing that one film that really speaks to you for you is like Luigi Amjuro, and that first bite of a radish with butter and flaky salt on it. I think for many of us who have had the pleasure of living in France, that's a taste that will always be, be
so
there.
Strong.
So what I'll do while Harriet is getting her slides ready, I'll remind everyone who's on the call at the moment to think of questions for Alistair as well and put those in the chat. And when we come to the end, again, as we will with Angela, we will hopefully get round to answering some of those questions. So pop the questions in the chat. We'll get Harriet set up for her slides as well, and we'll shortly hear from her.
Fantastic. There you go. I think you should be able to see my first slide there now. Talking about the radish made me think of the first having a topinambour in France, which I'd never had a Jerusalem artichoke, and I had it in France, and I only knew it as a topinambour for years and years and years. And it's got a bad reputation, but I think it tastes really good. So yeah. I'll wait another couple of seconds, let you guys have a little think, and then following on from Alice's story, I'll tell you my story, which is a little bit different. My name's Harriet Bunnett. I'm a freelance festival coordinator, but I mean, being a freelancer and at the stage of, I'm quite early career, so the stage I am, my title changes every month. So I've been an events manager, a logistics and program coordinator. Sometimes I'm a front of house duty manager. Sometimes I'm an international partnerships coordinator, development associate. I've had, for having graduated in 2022, I've had a lot of titles at this point. But here you go. This is a little bit about me. So I studied French and Spanish at the University of Edinburgh. I graduated in 2022. And then since then, I've been working across Edinburgh, building experience mainly in the festival circuit. Edinburgh is very famous for its festivals. It's known as the Festival City, and there are pretty much festivals year round. But I didn't know that festivals were going to be my path until pretty late in my degree. I actually started learning French and Spanish in high school. I'd always found Spanish and Latin American culture intriguing from afar. I was very detached from it, but French had always been quite accessible to me. My mum spoke French. We had lots of French friends. But I suppose for me, everything changed when I was 14. Similar to Alistair, I did a language exchange in France. And it was during this trip, being away from my family for the first time, being immersed in a French family, yelling at each other over the dinner table, where I understood near nothing, that I was actually excited by the challenge of learning to communicate in a different language. After about 5 days on that first trip, my brain just clicked. I cannot describe it in another way. And I could not only understand what they were saying, because that like block fell, but I could string together a sentence for the first time. And basically since then, I've been chasing that feeling. So my exchange partner, 12 years later, we're still friends. He's now a language teacher. So the exchange impacted us both equally. And then from that point onwards, learning French became my main focus. I studied really, really hard. I started watching French films. I spoke to my exchange partner all the time. I was obsessed with being able to speak French. My first live concert was a Belgian rapper who I heard in French class, Stromae, who I saw at the Hammersmith Apollo when I was probably too young. So it was really an obsession. But then I decided to push through and try and absorb as much French as possible. I took it for my A-levels, and then I chose Spanish as well. I found it a little bit easier than French. I think I pushed really hard with French, that Spanish just sort of like seeped into my brain a little bit more easily. And because of this, I decided to study languages at university. I really loved literature, English literature, and I thought that a degree in modern languages would allow me to study literature, but from so many different countries, expand my understanding of the world, and hopefully gain a little bit of fluency in both languages. Because, communicating was a really big thing for me. Before going to uni, I actually took a gap year, and I traveled to Spain. I worked as a nanny for 4 months. To try and get my spoken Spanish up to the same level. So I spent 4 months in Andalusia, and I got a pretty strong accent when I was down in Andalusia. And I decided I wanted to travel a little bit further with my newfound confidence in spoken Spanish, and I chose Cuba. So I'd studied the Cuban Revolution in high school, and I was curious to learn a little bit more. So when I was 19, I got on a plane and I flew to Cuba by myself, and I spent a month there. I learned to salsa dance, and because I picked up such a strong Andalusian accent, some people referred to me as La Española, the Spanish girl, because it was impenetrable. And then afterwards, I wanted to build up my French a little bit more. So I went to the middle of France, in the Champagne region, to work as an animatrice, which is like a children's camp entertainer. So I was just trying to build up all of my spoken language skills. Then I started my degree, and I discovered that whilst I found literature really interesting, there was this new, exciting, cool thing that I could, well, for me, it was very new, was international cinema. So I started taking some European cinema courses, and then I started taking specifically French New Wave courses, and more specifically, like Latin American media courses. And it was a really big change from learning this entire new media. And I wanted to, try out some new things. So while I was at university, I started working or volunteering for the Edinburgh Spanish Film Festival. There's a picture of me there in my second year. I was still a student when I started. I wanted to learn more about Spanish cinema. I wanted to work with Spanish-speaking people. The whole team was Spanish-speaking. And because of that one decision when I was a student, I've now done 4 editions with the Edinburgh Spanish Film Festival. I spend months of the year working in Spanish, and from that, I got my job with the French Film Festival. It's a big festival city, but everyone knows each other. So now I spend a little bit of time working in French as well. So since finishing my degree, I've been lucky that I've found jobs thanks to my degree that actually let me use my languages and let me engage in my passion for cinema. But learning languages it allowed me to learn so much about myself. I discovered I had the strength and the confidence from a young age to go abroad, immerse myself in all of these new situations. These experiences abroad actually help me now with the work that I've done. I know that I can jump into loads of new situations where I don't have all of the context, all of the language, and I know I can learn on my feet. And because of that, I've had so many experiences already that lots of people don't necessarily experience until later in their careers. So some things that I'm particularly proud of, I've got some pictures here of some of the festival work I've done. I've conducted filmed interviews with directors and actors in Spanish and in French. I've facilitated film panels with actors in their native languages. I've learned events management, team management. This is all through festivals, but specifically festivals working with French and Spanish cinema. I've also learned about programming an exhibition of film, which is really great and really, really cool. Done some social media content creation and marketing. I've been a guest liaison, so gone and picked up actors from the airport and then driven them to their hotel and introduced them to the city. I've attended UK premieres in Edinburgh and in London. There's a picture there of the Anatomy of a Fall premiere last year at the Ciné Lumière in London. So I was lucky enough to watch that Q&A and get to chat with everyone afterwards. I've met creatives whose work I really, really admire. So in the couple of years since graduating, just because of my decision, to pursue languages and then pursue international cinema, these are some of the things that I've got to do. And with my languages as well, I've lived in Paris, I've hitchhiked through Spain, I learned to dance in Cuba, and I've learned to use my languages professionally. So it's really been a mix of like life and personal enrichment, but also professional enrichment. And they've definitely secured my positioning in different international festivals in Edinburgh and organizations. So really, I mean, that's like my story. The benefit and the importance of learning languages, it can't really be stated enough. That's what we're all here trying to state, but I really don't believe it can be. For me, it's opened doors to cultural and diplomatic institutions. It's opened conversations with peers and new colleagues and people whose work I really admire. And it's allowed me to see more of the world. And I think specifically in the work that I've done with cinema, it's meant that not only can I watch these films by people who I really admire, I can then go and talk to them in their language, and I can gain like a further understanding of what they're saying and what they're trying to convey to audiences. And I mean, like I've said on the last slide here, it opens up so much music, so much culture, so many people, and so many conversations. So yeah, feel pretty passionate about it. And that's my story for you guys.
Thank you so much, Harriet. I think it's just great to hear you speaking so passionately about your language experiences and to hear all about the experiences and skills that you've had since graduation. It's amazing all that you've been able to achieve already. So really fascinating to hear about. And I think that moment in your language learning experience when everything just clicks, I think that happens for a lot of us. When we're learning a language, we're quite often sort of thinking about that grammar, the vocabulary, the building blocks first, but it's just having that confidence to speak. And as soon as you start to speak, you realize that you're able to learn a lot more and really communicate, and that's what learning a language is all about, of course. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, Harriet. Questions for Harriet, please, in the chat. And now we will move on to Ailey. Ailey, if you want to set up your slides.
Is that all right? You can see fine?
Great, yeah, we can see it. Thanks, Ailey.
Perfect. So hi everyone, I'm Ailey. Like Harriet, I also graduated from Edinburgh Uni in 2022. I'd previously been at Dunblane High School, shout out to Madame Reid in the languages department there. And there I'd studied higher and advanced higher, not five, higher advanced higher French. But when I was going to uni, I personally felt myself more drawn into the social sciences. So at Edinburgh Uni, I studied politics. Now, as you might be able to guess from the time frame, graduating from uni in 2022 meant that as I'm sure was similar for Harriet, maybe a bit different with languages students, but for general students, there wasn't really much opportunity to do years abroad or anything like that because of COVID, of course. So when it came to graduating and deciding what I wanted to do next, I really was keen to get some international experience. I'd gone to uni at 17, so I was really fresh coming out of university as well. And I was desperate to have some sort of international experience. So I kind of felt constrained about what I could do post-Brexit, which drew me to the British Council programme, which is the English Language Assistant programme. Now, because of COVID, I think, and because of not being able to do year abroad, all this kind of stuff, I really was seeking something really adventurous. So I first went to Quebec in 2022, which is one of the provinces of Canada. It's the main Francophone province for those who don't know. And after that, which I'm going to come on to talking about in a little bit, I went to Manosque, which is in the south of France. So yeah, first of all, when I was working in Quebec, this is my school that I worked at, which is called Juvenat Notre Dame, and it was just across the river from Quebec City. So I lived in Quebec City, which is the capital of the province. It's about 2.5 hours away from Montreal, and I commuted 1 hour per day to my school, which was you can see these yellow buses. Unfortunately, I did not take the classic North American yellow school bus. That's what the student travel to school in, but I just took regular public transport bus, which not the best in North America, but it was great. So when you're working as an English language assistant, you're essentially helping out the languages department of the school with English language activities. And so there are language activities, culture activities as well. So in my school, because we're in Quebec, the foreign languages they were teaching were English and Spanish. So I was helping in English classes. I didn't have a Spanish background, so my colleague, she was doing more Spanish stuff. There was two of us as language assistants, so she was doing the Spanish classes and I was working English classes. So you might be able to see on the bottom corner the kinds of activities I were doing. We did a Highland Games activity where I organised it with all of the S1 age group. We did a Highland Games with loads of different activities. I taught them loads of Scots and lots of slang as well. They really like that kind of thing. And I did lots of game show type activities like Pointless, Would I Lie to You, just adapted them into classes. So I found this experience really fun, but probably the best part about being in Canada was the fact that I got to experience such a different lifestyle and such a different climate, especially. So you can probably tell crazy amounts of snow in Quebec. I think Montreal is quite different to Quebec City where I was living. There's a lot more snow outside of Montreal, just that because I'm that bit further north, and I think being in Montreal is a bit more, the more urban the areas, the less snow we've got. But where I was, there was plenty of snow. I think the coldest experience I had was minus 40 degrees Celsius, which quite extreme. At that point you have frozen eyelashes, frozen sinuses, you can feel in your nose that it's frozen, which is crazy. And I'd never skied before as well, so I got to try skiing for the first time because winter sports were super accessible in my town. Some other things as well, I got to do whale watching trip, and I got to see belugas and sperm whales as well, because there's great opportunities for that in Canada. And you really feel the difference in terms of the four seasons. You can see the bottom left corner and the top right corner. That's more autumnal versus spring, summer at the bottom, compared to winter, of course, as well. So it's quite different to Scotland, where we've got quite a temperate climate overall. I really enjoyed the variety that you get. Suddenly it turns to May and it's 25 degrees, June, July, 30 degrees most days, compared to minus 30, minus 40 winter. So that was really an incredible part of the experience. But so when I was coming towards the end of that year, I'd inherited a Quebecois French accent. And so because I'd studied French in Europe, and because I kind of saw myself living in Europe for the majority of my life, I was quite keen to try and, let's say, rectify my French a little bit. So I also was interested in applying for a master's in France, but I didn't feel like my French was yet good enough because I hadn't studied French at uni. It had been quite some time since I studied French, and I'd only really been practicing my spoken French whilst I was in Canada. I had done no writing and very little reading as well. So I then thought about going to going to France as well. But I've just remembered I've got another slide as well, just to illustrate a little bit about some of the travel experience I had as well in Canada. So I got to do school trips to northern Manitoba, which is in Canada. That's a picture of me driving a Skidoo, which was just a crazy experience. I didn't have my driver's license at this point, and I said to the guy, "Is it okay if I drive it? Because I'm driving on top of a frozen river here." And he's like, "Yeah, I don't care, go for it." Just having like crazy experience like that. I also did a school trip to Vancouver, which was fantastic, and then quite a bit of traveling in North America as well. So I went to New York on an overnight bus. I went to Niagara Falls. I went to Maine, because all this is quite accessible whilst you're an English language assistant, because you've really got the time as well, because you don't work full-time hours. You've got long weekends often. You've got school holidays. You can really make the most of having a salary and being abroad and travel. So I've got a bit excited. That now takes me to France. So basically, after, as I said before, I decided I wanted to work in France to try and improve my French. That was like my main priority. So I chose to go to a secondary school for my a primary school for my second year, because I'd spoken to some friends who'd done the English language assistant program in primary school, and they'd said, look, you're going to have even more French immersion if you work with younger kids. So in the end, I was working in École Maternelle, which is basically nursery school. It's for ages 4 to 6. And yes, my French definitely improved with them, because they just talk at you incessantly in French, and you can really improve a lot when you're working with really young kids, especially. And I also did French classes when I was in Manosque, because I was really keen to improve my written French and my reading as well. So Manosque is a really small town. This is another big draw of seeking to improve my French, was being in a small town. There was nobody in my town that I spoke to regularly that spoke English. So it was a really immersive experience being there, and it really allowed me to improve my French, which was my main goal for the year. So the activities that I was doing were really different to in Canada. In Canada, I was primarily speaking English the majority of the time with my students. When I was in France, it was the basics. So I was teaching them colours, numbers, basic questions. We did an activity where I taught them my grand shortbread recipe, which was fantastic. They really enjoyed that. I mean, it was a little bit grotty, if you can imagine, like loads of 4-year-olds all just getting their hands in, and then you have to eat it and tell them it's delicious. They've done a great job, but it's fine, it's good for your immune system. We also did I taught them like Orcadian Strip the Willow, which they absolutely loved. And being in a small town as well, I got involved with some of the European volunteers that are there. So we started a language cafe together where we did language sharing. We had English, Italian, Spanish, French, German, and Swahili. I think that was the languages we offered. So this was to encourage people in the town to come and learn languages and to practice languages. And I really enjoyed that part of the experience as well. And it encouraged me to pick up another language, because one of my best friends there was Spanish. So it meant that I decided to start learning Spanish as well. So being in France, I also had a lot of opportunities for travel in Europe. This is probably most people will know this already, but the public transport in Europe compared to North America is just incomparable. So when I'm saying like in Canada, I was doing traveling, it was mainly making friends with people that had cars, whereas when I was in France, I could really make use of public transport. I know we complain like ScotRail is not the most reliable. It's the same with the trains in France and across Europe, but at least they exist. So yeah, I got to do a lot of traveling in France and beyond. And those eagle-eyed might spot the Sagrada Familia. I managed to take the Flixbus for like €8 and go to Barcelona as well. So some really great opportunities for travel, both in France and beyond. So where has this taken me? So now I'm living in Paris and I'm studying at Sciences Po. So I'm studying international governance and diplomacy here, which this is essentially what I did want to continue doing when I graduated from politics in Edinburgh. But I don't think I would have come and done it in Paris at such a good university, such a good opportunity. I just wouldn't have had the courage to come and live abroad and be partly studying in French if I hadn't learned languages, if I hadn't just forced myself to get my French back and learn languages through being a language assistant. So now I live here. I've been at UNESCO. This was just on a trip a few weeks ago, which was a fantastic experience. But yeah, basically languages have allowed me to now have now taken me to the position that I'm in, and allowed me to come and study here in France. So yeah, that's a bit about my experience. If you've got any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. I hope I've done all right for time. I can't actually see the time on my screen, but yeah, there we go.
Thanks so much, Ailey. Another brilliant presentation. And so interesting, I think, to hear how, although you were speaking French in all these places, you've had such different cultural experiences in France, the south of France, to Paris, to Quebec, so different in terms of their own traditions and cultures and accents as well, I'm sure you'll have realised too. So really great to hear about it. Thank you, Ailey. So I know that we have a few questions already in the chat. So let's make a start. So first question to Angela, please. Do you have a scientific background? If so, how did you combine this with your languages?
No, I don't. Curiously though, I got the prize in math right up until about 4th year in school. I didn't get the prize in 5th year because you really needed physics then, and I didn't do physics and chemistry. But when I sort of graduated, having done French and German language and literature, a lot of friends, I didn't want to teach. That wasn't my thing. And I'd also done an assistant. I was l'assistante d'anglais in Monceau-les-Mines in Burgundy, open mining cast. But I just didn't want to teach. And a lot of my friends were going into retail. Some were going into accountancy. Didn't really fancy that. But I wanted technology. I liked technology organizations and companies. And I think, so what I was doing is I was managing, for example, polyurethanes and chlorofluoro, taking out the CFCs that were damaging the ozone. I got that project based in Brussels for ICI. So I was working with scientists who would be doing all they'd be explaining chemistry to me, and I just got my head around it. And I've never been scared of that. So I think it was just that openness to science, that and not feeling estranged and like someone speaking a foreign language to you. You just think, no, this is just other vocabulary. Explain it, and you become passionate about it. People explain the ins and outs, and I think ultimately, sort of landing with a team of mathematicians, theoretical physicists. It's trying to make mathematics work for society and the future of humanity. That's my goal. That's my ambition. So no, I did not. But you come in as I actually did business and finance at the Solvay Business School in Brussels. So again, I had a business. I took a formal diploma in that, and that got me sort of on the ladder of being able to do sort of business, marketing, sales, and become, ultimately the vice president of Europe, Middle East, and Africa for American companies coming here, etc. So that's, but always technology, always about taking technology to market and working with fantastic scientists. And I adore that and still do. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Angela. And I'll bring the next question to Alistair, please. How can we get involved in cinema projects? Any ideas?
Yeah, there's so many different things, and cinema is coming up as very much part of the curriculum now as well, which is really exciting in Scotland. I'm just about to send you an email, Jane, if you want to copy the link into that. For some reason, the joys of Teams, it's not letting me comment in the chat at all. So I would have pasted this in otherwise. But here's a link to Cinéma Centre de Jeunesse, the website. I translated most of it into English for them, and that gives you an approach to working with the Cinéma Centre de Jeunesse approach, which is to look at one theme, such as like distance in cinema or colour in cinema, all that kind of stuff, and how you might want to choose to do that. But there are Screen Argyll, our company, if you want to have a look at that, we've got lots of different projects, so screenargyll.co.uk, and we've also got Into Film, who are a brilliant organisation based in Edinburgh, as well as London and other regional places. But yeah, there's an office in Edinburgh. Into Film allow loads of different pathways into film, and there's also, if you're looking at working with young people if you are a young person who wants to work in cinema, there's a website called Screen Skills. I think it's screenskills.org. If you go there and have a look, that shows you pathways into the industry in every avenue. You could be really good with languages, get involved in making like films here as a runner for a French company that's shooting here. all those different kind of things. There's so many different things. Or you could be really good with accountancy, numbers. You get involved as a production accountant eventually. And, there's the world of film is so open to so many skills, and languages are a part of that. So you could take, you could learn Spanish, go off, or German, and go off to Germany and try and get a job as a runner out there. And people go, "Why is a Scots girl wanting to do this here? I remember you. You come with me. Let's make films." And you might, you Scots people. I don't think we've said this. Scots people tend to stand out. I don't know what it is, but Scots do stand out. You've experienced that as well. It's like people are curious, like, "Oh, what is Scotland? Why?" So yeah, there's a real stance there. Yeah. Hope that helps.
Thanks, Alistair. I put that link in the chat for everyone as well. Harriet, did you want to come in on that as well, in terms of sort of getting into cinema, if you had anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, if it's more, I mean, obviously, Alice has already talked about so many amazing projects that you're involved in. For the festivals that I've worked for, often, the French Film Festival runs November to December. The Spanish Film Festival runs for 2 weeks in October. And we try and run like schools programs. Sometimes there are complimentary tickets as well that are given out to students, language students especially, who want to come along to screenings. So the Edinburgh Spanish Film Festival, we had screenings in Edinburgh and Glasgow, in Dundee, in Inverness. So I know the name's a bit of a misnomer. But anyway, so we do try and give out tickets to language students to try and bring you along to our screenings. So that would be, I would say keep an eye out on our websites, on our social media. Also, we try and send out materials and online schools programs to schools across Scotland and across the UK, to allow language students like yourselves to also be engaged like within the classroom. So those are things that I would say, but I mean, Alistair's got some amazing suggestions there.
Thank you, Harriet, as well. That was super. And maybe just very quickly coming to Ailey, there's a question about funding a year abroad in Canada. So could you touch on how the language assistant programme works, and what that looks like for the time that you spend abroad?
Yeah, so when you're a language assistant, you are paid. And I know for Canada that the rates went up last year. So I'm not sure exactly what the salary is now, but considering the hours that you work, it's pretty affordable. It's pretty reasonable, sorry. Because I think I was working 20 hours a week, which is part-time hours. And when I was there, I was making about, I think, 1,500 Canadian dollars a month, which more than covered my living expenses. The only thing that you have to pay for in advance is your Canadian visa, which cost me about £200. But I decided that was a cost I'd worked during my degree, and I mean, it'd been COVID, I hadn't spent that much money. I still had a bit left over from my student loan that would allow me to do that. If you want to do it, you can do the British Council scheme as a year abroad as well. And different universities, there's no longer Erasmus funding, but different universities have got, I know at Edinburgh, they've got the Go Abroad Fund, which can help towards year abroad or going abroad projects as well. In France as well, I had accommodation provided through my school. So I was paid 900 euros a month, and I only paid 100 euros in rent, which meant I had 800 left over to help me pay for my living costs. So it is pretty well. It doesn't sound like a lot of money, or maybe it does, but it's for the work that you do, it's pretty reasonable, and your living costs are often helped out by your school as well. So it is it's the most affordable way that I've found to be able to live abroad, especially post Brexit, because you need a contract in order to be able to work in the EU if you want to easily get experience abroad. So yeah, it's a really reasonable offering for the job that you're doing.
Thanks, Ailey. That was really helpful. Great. So I know that we are pretty much at time, so we're going to very quickly whiz through the last couple of slides with you all. If Lorna, you could go to the continued engagement slide. Thank you. So we also just wanted to highlight some of our language opportunities that we have coming up at British Council that you might like to get involved in. So where Where Will Languages Take Me, the event that we've done today, there's also a bank of videos on our website with other speakers who have different experiences too. So if you want to learn more about where languages can take you, I would encourage you to look at the website. Yesterday, we launched a big piece of research called Language Trends Scotland for the first time, and looking at current learning and teaching of languages in Scotland. So that is also published on our website if you're interested in learning a bit more about what language learning looks like just now in Scotland in our schools. We have an international school partner finding tool as well, which is a really great way to bring an international dimension into your classroom. You can find a partner school, filter by language, country, or theme. So there's lots of opportunities there. Or if you're interested in maybe partnering with a school abroad and want a bit more guidance, we've got 2 partnerships open at the moment, UK-Ukraine partnerships focusing on the joy of reading, and a learning sectors partnership, which is in partnership with Formula One, and looking at STEM skills with partner schools in South Africa and India. So we're hoping to see lots of Scottish schools on the starting grid. We also have, with partner organisations, there's lots of activities happening as part of Languages Week Scotland, which we are in right now. So check out the SILT website and the hashtag Scotland Loves Languages for lots of inspiration and events. Finally, there's Celebrate Speaking Festival. This is a virtual festival for young people and a chance for you to really show off your languages. So the hashtag is Celebrate Speaking. Again, we've got lots more information on the website, but a really good way for you to engage with other school communities and learners speaking languages and showing off your skills. So it now comes to me to say a huge thank you to our speakers. Angela, Alistair, Harriet and Ailey, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. It was absolutely brilliant to hear from you. Kind of wish we were able to do double the time, because I'm sure we've all got loads of questions that we would have loved to ask, but really appreciate you taking the time today and sharing your stories. Thank you also to our cultural institutes. We appreciate all that you do to connect us to German, French and Spanish language and culture. Thank you to the teachers for the brilliant work that you do to bring languages to life with your pupils, to Lorna and Raj, who have helped behind the scenes in monitoring the chat and doing all the tech for us. And finally, a huge thank you to you, all the pupils on the call and watching the recording. We really hope that you've been inspired by the personal stories that you've heard today, and that you'll keep learning languages to see where they take you. As you've heard today, it can really open up a whole world of opportunity and adventure. So thank you all so much. Really great to see you, and all the best with your language learning.